Hello and welcome. My name's Alexander Willox. I'm the editor of the Australian Outlook blog. I'm here with Dr Knut Dörmann, who is the Chief Legal Officer and Head of the Legal Division at the International Committee for the Red Cross. We're here today at the 4th Commonwealth Red Cross and Red Crescent Conference on International Humanitarian Law. Thank you for joining us, Doctor.
Pleasure being here and with you.
Excellent. I guess I'll just start us off by asking you what you think some of the key issues facing international humanitarian law are today.
I think the biggest challenge, but this is not a new challenge for international humanitarian law, is how to ensure respect for the norms. We face so many conflict situations. We face so much disrespect for the law. So currently we have not an issue that could be circumscribed as lack of rules, but it's much more lack of respect for existing rules.
Mm-hmm. So is that and how do you change that though? How do you address a lack of respect?
Well, there's not one single solution to this phenomenon. I think it has to be always a collective effort to work on this challenge. It's pretty clear that the primary responsibility for respecting the rules is obviously with the parties to an armed conflict. But then it's a broader responsibility as well for the international community, individual states, or collectively that they work to ensure respect for the norms. This can be done in a variety of ways. It can be done through diplomatic pressure. It can be done through collective action, direct interventions with the parties to an armed conflict. And then obviously you have actors such as the International Committee of the Red Cross with its specific working methods, which is based on confidential, direct dialogue with the parties to an armed conflict to work for the faithful application of international humanitarian law.
Given the confidential nature of that, there's obviously some things that you can't talk about, but I want to ask about given that the majority of conflicts today seem to be with non-state armed conflicts, so we've got Syria is a great example, the conflict going on in Syria and Iraq, and perhaps the one occurring in the Ukraine. I was just curious, because there's a failure of many states to ratify the additionality protocols, and those protocols, particularly the United States, they pertain to those sorts of conflicts. I guess, how do you see IHL being applied in the future if conflicts around the world are occurring more and more in that sort of nature?
You're absolutely correct in saying that non-international armed conflicts are the most prevalent types of armed conflicts, and clearly, given that they involve non-state armed actors, non-state parties to an armed conflict, they have their own challenges because you have different types of groups. You have different types of capacity to implement the rules of international humanitarian law. You have different types of command structures that will ensure that the rules are being complied with. So one has to work on these matters very clearly. With your second point, with regard to treaty ratification, I would submit that this is a bit less the problem, because the core of the rules of international humanitarian law, the major prohibitions, the fundamental rules, they are enshrined in very simple provisions like Common Article 3 to the 4 Geneva Conventions, and they are universally ratified and accepted. So it's not a question of really ratification of treaties. Sometimes you could say it's an issue of lack of detail of some provisions.
But if it's not an issue of ratification, how do you get non-state actors to comply with those sort of things when they aren't even being, in many cases, given the same rights by states for fear of legitimizing them? Obviously the ICRC has communication with some of these non-state actors, but how do you get them to comply with those sort of rules?
Well, your first point, absolutely correct. Treaties and norms are being concluded in between states. So non-state armed groups are not sitting on the negotiating table, and this for obvious reasons, because they have no international standing. The other thing is also true that application of international humanitarian law, given that they are meant to reduce the horrors of armed conflicts, the application in itself does not grant any type of legitimacy. Mm-hmm. So it will not upgrade status, and this is important to bear in mind. Now, this reality, which has been all the time since international humanitarian law has been created, poses the question how you create also a sense of ownership for the norms by non-state armed actors. And it's true that the most or the biggest incentive in quotation mark that armed groups have based on existing law is the prospect that at the end of an armed conflict, the broadest possible amnesty should be granted, provided that war crimes have not been committed. So the incentive is much smaller in non-international armed conflict than in international armed conflict, where you would have a so-called combatant privilege, meaning that if you comply with the norms, in any case you can't be prosecuted for acts that otherwise would be criminal under domestic law. Now, your second question, how do you act then, and how do you influence these actors? I think they are always then strategic arguments that are there. Non-state armed groups often strive also for international recognition or acceptance, and it may be that armed opposition groups become at a certain point the new government of a country, so they have an interest also in the eyes of the international community to respect the norms in certain standards that are so basic, like do not torture, do not kill, do not rape. These are standards that normally should be the standards even without being on the negotiating table for drafting treaties.
So, I mean, it's true that these should be the standards, but is there, because a lot of these things still go on, unfortunately, is there really a role for international humanitarian law going forward in this sort of age of terror? I mean, how do you feel about at the application of it? I mean, I
would say so. There's simply no alternative. To use just a comparison with domestic criminal law, you would not say if in a domestic setting there are heightened numbers of murders or other crimes that are being committed, that all of a sudden domestic criminal law is not relevant anymore. Mm-hmm. So the relevance of international humanitarian law will always stay, even though that there may be large-scale violations. The challenge is simply that the international community as a whole, with different means at disposal, have to work for the upholding of these norms and to renew regularly also the consensus around these absolute standards.
I have one final question about the migration crisis that's happening around the world. Mm-hmm. A lot of this is being caused by a lot of these non-state conflicts. Syria comes to mind, and perhaps the one in Myanmar with the Rohingya refugees, which is more regional to Australia, I suppose. What do you think the ICRC and international humanitarian law can do or is doing to help with these refugees in this situation that they find themselves in?
Well, certainly there are different categories of persons that are fleeing particular situations. You may have migrants, as you described them. You may have internally displaced persons. These are probably those that you're referring most to when you look at situations like Syria or the Ukraine. Then you have also refugees, which is a distinct status as well under international law. When you have a situation of an armed conflict, then obviously international humanitarian law applies. And when you look at internally displaced persons or migrants, they would enjoy then the protections that civilians would enjoy under international humanitarian law. So there you have certain protections. Now, when it comes to the work that also the International Committee of the Red Cross or the movement at large can do with regard to migration, it's clear that the humanitarian needs are quite important. That the scale is there, and there's a very strong commitment in light of these humanitarian needs from the movement and the International Committee of the Red Cross in particular to work for the vulnerable migrants. And this in particular as well because of our global presence and at migrants' trails. And the type of work will certainly depend on context. It's not one size fits all. But the type of activities come from where we have specific expertise. So it can be re-establishing family links, it can be work for migrants in detention or other protection activities. So that's something that we do, but it's also clear that you have many specialized international organizations in questions related to migration, and their effective coordination is absolute crucial, and cooperation as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your participation. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much as well. Me too. Thank you.